Hello, and welcome to the Gaia Update for Eclipse Season, June 2020. I'm Adrienne Elise. Well, here we are moving into our first set of eclipses since the nodal shift, where the North Node moved from Cancer into Gemini. They moved backwards through the zodiac signs, and the South Node from Capricorn into Sagittarius. So this is a big shift, and the eclipses happen when the nodes of the moon line up, with the sun and the moon line up with the nodes of the moon. Now, the nodes of the moon are where the path of the moon around the earth and the earth around the sun intercept. So it has an energy of a lining up, a revealing. It has to do with timelines and time. And so let's check into this eclipse season. So officially the eclipse season starts on the new moon in Gemini, the lunation before the eclipses, that happens on May 22nd. Very powerful new moon, as we have Venus and Mercury, the ruler of Gemini, Venus retrograde, together in exact square to Neptune. So that kind of starts off this whole story. And then at the end of May, we have Mars in a sextile to Uranus. Mars now in Pisces. And through this eclipse season, we also have Venus retrograde. So these are important energies as we look at this whole thing, because Venus is in Gemini, where the North Node is, taking this retrograde, meaning 4 months in the sign of Gemini. Wow. So Gemini is about rearranging. It's a mutable air sign, and air is about communication, our thoughts, our beliefs, and with a mutable energy, Gemini is like the butterfly going from flower to flower, checking out all the options, trying to, very gregarious, wanting to communicate, wanting to discuss, wanting to talk it all through, right? And so we're trying to figure out what's going on here. So it's powerful energy that Mercury is at home for this, at the beginning of this eclipse cycle, at the beginning of when the nodes have made this shift into Gemini and Sagittarius. So that Mars sextile Uranus is kind of speaking to the energies of Mars and Pisces, and that's potent because Mars wants to go and to move, but Pisces is very watery, very in the bigger kind of collective consciousness. We're talking about dreams and visions, also delusions. And so Mars is saying, can we move through the delusions of the Piscean age? And of course, as you go to clear up these things, as you put the motor on the boat, and Mars and Pisces is going to stir up some mud, which is exactly the energy of Venus retrograde, and where Venus retrograde always asks us to examine what we really care about and how our life lines up with that or not. And because of the world situation we've been in, all of our constructs and our compensations and who we thought we were and our identities and our plans have been kind of washed out to sea. And so we're in this very strange place of trying to figure out how all this can work together, really confused about what we want, what we care about, and then really having to face with this Venus retrograde where our life doesn't add up to what we wanted, what we thought we wanted, and what we thought we wanted isn't what we really want, and really bringing us with that square Venus square Neptune as a hallmark of this Venus retrograde, this place of ultimate unfulfillment, right? That we've been working our whole lives to try to get the things we want and to get that job we want and the money we want and the house we want and the relationship we want. And none of that's going to fill the hole. And that's kind of this energy of Venus retrograde and square to Neptune that starts off this whole shebang of eclipse season. Now, it's potent that on May 28th, at the very end of May, we've got that Mercury is finishing up in Gemini and will come into a conjunction with the North Node. Mercury, the ruler of Gemini. So this is where we're getting like, okay, what is this about? What is this North Node in Gemini about? What do we need to rearrange? What concepts and beliefs and thoughts and actually the whole way we think seems to need to be rearranged? And Mercury's trying to get some clarity about that. And then going back to that Mars and Pisces, leading up right before that, at the very end of May, is that sextile with Uranus in Taurus. And this is a sweet energy. Uranus in Taurus is about new energies being infused into our world. It's about rearranging if we're talking about rearranging our self-worth. Venus is a ruler of Taurus, and Uranus is trying to bring new energies into the structures of our world, going from a particle configuration to a wave reality. And that requires some adjusting. So maybe that's what this is all about. So that the end of the month, that Mercury coming into conjunction with the North Node, kind of saying, oh, okay, this is this chapter. This is what we're doing here with Mercury, with the North Node in Gemini. Now the nodes stay in a sign for close to, about a year and a half. So it's a chapter. We're looking at a whole chapter, a whole experience here. But the Venus retrograde in Gemini is really starting it off with a bang. So the first eclipse, right after that Mercury comes into the conjunction with the North Node, that's at the very end, because the nodes move backwards. So it's at the very end of Gemini. And so it's like Mercury's completing its journey in its home sign. Bam. Conjunction with the North Node, saying, okay, we've arrived into the nodal shift. And then it moves into the sign of Cancer. Now, this is crucial because Mercury is taking a retrograde in Cancer. And so on the 2nd of June, Mercury gets into its retrograde shadow already. So we've got this Venus retrograde, lasts about 6 weeks. It turns direct on June 25th, which will be after the 2 eclipses. So Venus is retrograde through this whole time. And now we have Mercury already in retrograde shadow in Cancer. So that's interesting because we just finished up the North Node in Cancer. Because the nodes, they kind of move around like this, that it's like a place in the sky, right? And so it moves around, but it generally just kind of moves backwards through the zodiac. And a lot of times we don't really totally understand the nodal energy until the next sign. So this Mercury retrograde in Cancer is like, okay, what was this last year and a half about? Did we get the message? Do we understand? So the nodes are about, they have to do with the past and the future. So the North Node is like, how are we going to what's our path? What's the timeline? Where are we going? How are we going to get to where we need to go? So for the last year and a half, it's been in Cancer. It's been about nurturing, coming back into a nurturing relationship with life, coming back into our connection with the mother, receiving as a way to get back into wholeness and healing our humanity, healing that rift of disconnection, of allowing ourselves to receive. So this is all on the table as Mercury takes this retrograde in Cancer, kind of bringing forward all of these issues. And did you get the message? Are you receiving? Right? Are you able to receive? Did you come back into your connection with the mother? We all have mother wounds because we've all, like, Earth evolution by definition is about, because of a story that happened way before Earth evolution, it's about not being able to connect, feel safe, and feel at home on our planet. Like we are actually have a home and we're cared for here. So that Cancer energy was really about like, hey, you guys, if you're going to move into this new dimensional reality, into the Aquarian age, you got to get this worked out, And it's interesting how many stories throughout history and throughout a whole evolution saying, oh, well, a big shift like that, you're going to have catastrophe. You're going to have a bunch of earthquakes. You're going to have, all this chaos and stuff. And it's like, no, it's actually the opposite. When we connect back to the mother principle, which is represented in our earth, our physical, beautiful manifestation of the Great Mother, as this beautiful life force goddess Gaia manifest. When we come back in, that's the only way we can move forward. And when we do come back into connection, it's harmonized. And that's a big part of this spiritual shift, this ascension. We're doing it with the earth. She's our spaceship. We're all going together, And it's like, so how, if we're going to, we've got to come back into connection in order for it to be harmonized and back into that trust, into that heart space, into that love. So Mercury retrograde, this is probably, some of the messages coming through. So right at the end of May, it goes into Cancer, into its retrograde shadow at 5 degrees Cancer on the 2nd of June. And then a very potent energy on the next day, the 3rd of June, when the Sun and Venus come together. So Venus is going backwards and it's retrograde in Gemini, the Sun in Gemini crossing over, crossing ships in the night. And the Sun is like, who do you think you are? And Venus retrograde, so it's a lot of energy coming up, especially that Mercury in Cancer. We got Mars and Pisces, and this energy of like, I don't know who I am. I don't know what I want, because everything I thought I wanted doesn't fit anymore. And it was all washed away to sea with this current crisis, And so it's just like, oh man, the lost sailor, humanity just kind of bopping around on the ocean of life is kind of what this feels like. So confusion of identity and, but it's like all about getting back to a better value system of what really matters to us, And so that is, something to keep in mind through this eclipse season. So the first eclipse happens on Friday, June 5th, and that is a lunar eclipse. Now, it's not very close to the nodes. It's just like less than 15 degrees. So it's not a total lunar eclipse. It's just a partial eclipse, but it's still eclipse season, is still an eclipse, and there's going to be potent energy there. So the lunar eclipse is happening at 15 degrees Sagittarius. And so then we're bringing in this Sagittarius energy, like the South Node in Sagittarius. What does that have to do with, right? So around the energies around this lunar eclipse. So the lunar eclipse happens at a full moon. And that's, of course, when the sun and the moon are opposite each other in the zodiac. And so when they're opposite each other and they're lining up with the nodes, it's like that sun, moon, earth lining up. That's when we're talking about timeline alignments. We're talking about truth. We're talking about adjustments in our whole perspective of where we're coming from and where we're going. And, of course, with a nodal shift, that's what this time is all about. So that is while this is so we have that Venus-Sun conjunction, Venus retrograde, confusion of identity, and then we've got, so we're still feeling that during this eclipse, and then the Sun is in square with Mars for this first eclipse, and so conjunct Venus square with Mars, so Venus and the Sun in square to Mars, and Mars and Pisces. So now that's interesting, right? Because we've just had a whole month, the whole month of May was about Venus retrograde in square to Neptune. Now the Sun and Venus are in square to Mars. So it's this Pisces Gemini energy. And it's something really important because Pisces is the end, the last sign of the zodiac. Gemini is in the first quadrant. It's about life and formation. And Gemini is about, it represents the developmental stage of when we're dealing with the other. It's about sibling. It's about communication, relationships, and who are we in relation to the other. And so that's where we're at, trying to orient ourselves in the world. And of course, the Venus retrograde feels like a great disorientation, especially in square to Neptune. And now Venus and the Sun, I don't know who I am. I don't know what I want. I don't know where I'm going because the Sun's moving forward, of course, and Venus is moving backwards. And there's a lunar eclipse in Sagittarius. And then in square to Mars, it's like Mars is saying, we got to figure out how to move out of the mud of this past age. But Venus and the sun are like, but we don't know who we are and what we want. And that's where there's this divine energy coming in with this Venus retrograde, as uncomfortable as it is going to be for this eclipse season, Venus retrograde. It's about like, we cannot keep going the way we're going. Everything you thought was what you wanted or what you needed is not fit who you really are. And it's this massive game changer, but huge opportunity to rearrange into something better, more fulfilling. You know, we're going for more fulfillment. But the feeling of this Venus retrograde is that tide going out and like never coming back, and you're just alone on an island. But it's just a place we're visiting, and it's an opportunity to get into connection, right? So if you are looking for fulfillment, like we all are in the human condition, and you have this dream of this relationship or whatever, your job, your travel, your home, and then say that shows up. But is that keeping you from finding a deeper inner fulfillment, And it's like, so if we have that inner place of fulfillment, then the fulfillment we have in the outer world is going to be way better. It's going to way more fit who we really are. It's going to be the better, more higher octave relationship. It's going to be a more appropriate place to live. But it's really hard to let those constructs and structures rearrange in our life. But that's this time we're in, and coming on the heels of this Jupiter-Pluto conjunction and the coronavirus craziness. And it's like, okay, nowhere else to go besides closer to center. So maybe that's this energy. And the closer we go to center, the less we know who we are and what we want. And so part of June 2020 is about just being comfortable in the uncomfortable and saying, okay, I don't know what I want. I don't know where I'm going. I don't know who I am. But that's because I'm getting to something more fulfilling and more in alignment. And it's really about the spiritual alignment. In these souls, it's like about, there's this part of you that's gone through so much. You've gone through so much in past lives to the point that, you want your life to be comfortable as much as possible, but you're not really attached to whether, there's so much more out there, right? Like, so you're not so attached to exactly how it needs to be, or even that you're alive or not, because you're eternal and you're just living this experience. And it just feels like you're being asked, these souls are being asked to finally reap the harvest of all the work you've done over all these lifetimes, which is about claiming and being present and owning in your vibrational field that oneness principle, that true fulfillment of the true self of who you are. So it's the ego breakdown and the ego death and loss of constructs. And the hard thing that's going on is that you are actually more comfortable with this because you've gone through this in recent years. But as the collective and your family starts to go through it, you're going to get sucked back in. And that's a big energy of June 2020. It's just like, watch out for the collective bloom of garbage and the soup, because you cannot get in there. You cannot stay there. That's not where you're supposed to be. You got to get back into your oneness principle. You got to connect into this greater, wider truth, which is that square with Neptune, Mars in square to the sun and Venus. It's saying that you don't know who you are because you've been living a fake life. We've all been living a fake life, a Facebook, something on the surface, materialism. And it's just like at these crucial times in history and our evolution, we have to examine who we are beyond our stories. So that Neptune, that Pisces square Gemini is like, who am I in relation to the world? And it's like, the truest part of you is who you are in relation to God and creator and source and the bigger spiritual energy, right? So it's like, we got to just stop messing around. But the closer you get to stopping to mess around and into your true essential fulfillment, the more intense it gets, and the more confusing it gets, and the more dark it gets, and the more hopeless it gets. It's like the closer you get to freeing yourself from that lower matrix. So there's a huge bloom of this tentacly, matrixy energy and the collective trauma and your family contracts, and just like pulling you, and the Venus retrograde old relationship trauma is just pulling you back into that trauma body, you know? But the message for these souls is like, you're here to lead the way, and you've got to extract yourself. You've gone through all you've gone through in past lives because you're not attached. And go and reap the benefit of that. And it feels really good. But then it's like, you're over here out of the trauma body and the hazmat suit, like feeling really good in the garden. And then it's like, how dare you? How dare you? You know, who gave you the right to be in connection to God? And so this is the challenge, right? It's like we're being invited to reap the benefit of all of the difficult experiences over lifetimes and make it so worth it to step into that greater, wider truth of who we really are spiritually. But there's a massive challenge to that in the collective energy in our authority contracts and our loyalty contracts. So this is just this back and forth energy of this eclipse season of June 2020. So let's talk about this lunar eclipse on the 5th, where we have that Sun and Venus in square to Mars, total confusion about who we are and where we're going, deeper into the mud. And so maybe deeper into the mud is what gets us that clarity. So Sagittarius, the South Node in Sagittarius in this lunar eclipse, the very first eclipse with these in these signs. And so Sagittarius, the South Node, is like, what's holding you back from the past? You know, the North Node is like, how are you going to get to where you're going? And then the South Node is like, what is holding you back from the past? Now, this is huge energy and very powerful, potent messages for these souls that kind of makes everything make sense. The reason why you're being pulled back into the collective soup, back into the trauma body, back into the loyalty contracts and the authority contracts, the lower matrix just sucking you back in, that is because of these issues from the past that haven't been resolved. And the Sagittarius energy is about path and purpose and direction. Now, Gemini and Sag, you know, that's the axis we're talking about. Gemini's like, oh, a little of this, and maybe I'll experiment here, and I'm going to go and experience this, and I'm going to kind of be all over the place. It's like the many. And then Sagittarius is the one. It's like the arrow directed, shooting off exactly where it wants to go, right? And so there can be some dogma energy with Sagittarius, but then there's also this energy of like being on your quest. This is what these souls that I work with have, this deepest, most powerful desire, like what they really want. They might think they want a relationship and they want this, but what they really want is to know who they are, know why they're here, and to get on their path, you know, to know and this is like a lot of times in individual sessions, we'll do timeline resets, and that's like going back in time when you were more directed. And it's this feeling of like, I know exactly why I'm here. I know exactly what I'm doing. And it's like one foot in front of the other, completely directed. I know exactly my plan, right? And of course, that can get us into trouble with the dogma energy. But what's coming up around this for these souls is this feeling of failing on your mission and your quest, and like you don't deserve it, you know? And this bloom of just such confusion and collective like unrest right now is making these souls, it's bringing up failures from past lives. Like it's subconscious. It's not like you're walking around feeling like a failure from past life, but it's like seeping through in a very uncomfortable way. And it's good to kind of understand that's what it is, because it's like right now we're facing the reality of how asleep people want to stay. And a lot of these souls are taking it personally, like they didn't do enough in other lifetimes or this lifetime. But that's what's holding you back. That is what's holding you back from getting back directed on your path. The main issue for these souls, like I said, is feeling like they're like, I know I have something here to do, but I don't know what it is and I don't know how to do it. So this South Node Sagittarius is like bringing that all to the surface. And it's like we have to release, because a lot of times people, like these souls, say you were here and you're like, I know what I'm here to do, and I'm going to bring this spiritual impulse or this teaching or this message, and I'm focused, I'm going to do this, and I'm just on my path. And then say you get targeted, killed or distracted or exiled or, interfered with. And then your soul, as a sensitive soul, goes, ooh, I failed. Like, I don't deserve my path and purpose. I don't deserve my mission. Except it's like, this is all you live for. Why you bothered to keep coming back again and again? This feeling of full expression of the gifts of who you are. And the gifts of who you are and that true path and purpose and the package you want to put it in this world is hidden underneath these stories from past lives that you so-called failed. And again, I'm shown that it wasn't actually a failure because the energies weren't actually able to support you in that mission. You could only plant a seed. And now it's time to go back and sprout these seeds and get back together with your team and get to work on these projects. And it's going to be so amazing and exciting. And that's energy of Sagittarius underneath the grief, right? Of the failed mission, of being kind of stuck in the wilderness part of the journey. That's kind of what this Venus retrograde feels like. But remembering we're just visiting this place and energies continue to shift and change. So it's not forever. And so that's kind of the energy of this lunar eclipse is facing these, it's like, I don't know who I am. I don't know where I'm going. And that's because where you've been going isn't in alignment with your deeper mission because you got disconnected from it. You don't feel like you deserve it. And that's where that's kind of interesting energy with that, starting off this whole thing with the Mars sextile Uranus, because Uranus is in Taurus, it's about self-worth for the new vibrational frequencies, right? So you were actually working with these Aquarian vibrations back then in those past lives, right? And no wonder you got targeted because there's some dark ages had to happen. And that's the deal with you souls. You've incarnated into the darkest times and here you are again, right? But it's actually not dark, it's light. So now then we've got on the so that's kind of the energy of that eclipse. Now also during that eclipse, Mercury is in square to Chiron. So Mercury having moved over, into Cancer, getting ready for that retrograde, squaring up with Chiron in Aries. So this is bringing this orientation of that Cancer kind of trying to understand, Mercury's trying to understand the Cancer nodes, and did we get the message of the nurturing and the reconnecting? And this is saying, that inability to connect back with the nurturing force and the source of all has to do with these wounds of Chiron and Aries, which is where you haven't been able to be who you really are. In these souls, it's just such a story where in order to stay safe, if you were targeted for your path and your purpose and your fire and your mission, and your spiritual light, then you had to shut that down. And this is a big part of the resistance, the pain, the depression in these soul groups is the fact that you're turning down your light to make everybody else feel comfortable. And that's the wounds of Aries, of Chiron and Aries, is don't, twist yourself into something you're not in order to make the people around you feel safe and maybe the earth feel safe, as a light worker coming here and being rejected for what you bring, right? So that Mercury in Cancer in square to Chiron is really bringing it up. But also Mercury is about trying to figure it out, trying to get clarity, and it's a really clear message that goes right along. It happens on the exact day of this lunar eclipse, actually. So this is all tied together, right? It's we don't know who we are, where we're going. We're totally confused as to our path and purpose. And that has to do with because we've turned down our light so much, pretended we're something different. We've disconnected ourselves so far from who we are. We don't know who we are. And that relates exactly back to those wounds of turning down your light. And that's also connected to the South Node in Sagittarius, because, when you were targeted, you got off your path and purpose, you got off your mission. So maybe this Uranus and Taurus is about, when we bring all these pieces together, about permission to get back on your quest, right? So that's all on the table in the South Node, in the lunar eclipse there. It's like, whoa. And maybe that Venus Sun square Mars is like, whoa, I've been living a total lie, maybe lifetimes, completely denying my greater spiritual self. And that's all I really care about. Like, these souls, like I said, are not that attached to living or dying because they know they're eternal. They know there's so much more. But what matters is this expression of the fire within you, of your passion, of your path, of your purpose, of your spiritual gifts. And the thing is like, so many of these souls are like, well, I don't know. I feel like there's something I need to do here. There's something I have to offer, but do people really even want it? I don't know. And it's like, we need you. We desperately need you. This is what the earth needs right now. And maybe this is this whole June eclipse season. It's like, yeah, you don't know who you are because you've been living somebody else's lie, lifetime after lifetime. And you don't feel like you deserve your mission, except for that's who you are, and that's all you really want, and that's life itself. The feeling of being on your path, and that's the thing, you don't have to go achieve some big thing. That's this world's constructs, right? It's not about achieving some certain specific thing. It's about being directed and moving towards your goals. And then all those issues go away. And I think that's maybe this part of this Venus retrograde. There's been a huge blooming of like an esoteric loneliness and depression in these soul groups. And I think it's just like this deep disconnection from who you really are, which is exactly your path and purpose, to be that light, and not feeling like you deserve it because this issues of feeling like you failed, and then having to hide who you are and disconnect so far from who you are that you can't even find who you are. So very powerful energy with that lunar eclipse. And then as we move through June, the sun will make its square with Neptune. So again, we got more of the Gemini Pisces energy, and that's kind of in between the eclipses. And then Mars comes together with Neptune. So that's a very powerful energy as those things happen right around the middle of the month. A blooming as Mars comes into Neptune. Mars is like, okay, how do we get this ball rolling? How do we move through, let go of the Piscean age? How do we grab a hold of the spiritual impulse, the visionary, beautiful connection to that oneness, the spiritual revelation that started the Piscean age? How do we grab a hold of that and let go of all the garbage distortions, right? And then coming up with Neptune, it's like, whoa, I don't know how to move forward. Like, whoa, every time I try to go, I'm just going in circles and the fish are swimming around each other in the eddy, So kind of some energy there, but also Mars and Neptune is kind of pushing through those delusions and kind of giving us an opportunity to grab a hold of that spiritual revelation energy. So that is such an important piece of your spiritual mission, like what we talked about, that Sagittarius energy. Like, actually, if you had a direction and you knew where you were going, but you didn't have that connection to spiritual revelation, you wouldn't be able to do your path and purpose. And if you had the spiritual revelation without the direction, right? So very potent messages there. Now, right around the middle of the month as well, Jupiter moves to 25 degrees. Jupiter's retrograde, so it's going back to 25 degrees Capricorn. And at the same time, at the middle of the month, Saturn is also retrograde. It moves to 1 degree. Now, this highlights this Jupiter-Saturn connection. Jupiter and Saturn turned retrograde within a week of each other. They're going to turn direct within a couple of weeks of each other, and together move over the threshold from Capricorn to Aquarius in December. The next set of eclipses in December. So wow, right? And so during this eclipse season in the middle, they're both moving backwards to shifting to degrees. So it's just kind of an interesting energy. And Saturn is moving to going from that 1 degree to 0 degrees Aquarius. So then Mars will come into a sextile with Pluto. And that's going to lead us into the second eclipse. So Mars and Pisces is kind of having a lot of transits for this eclipse season. And speaking about kind of, grabbing a hold of the good parts of the Piscean age and leaving behind the garbage. And so this Pluto in Capricorn is also retrograde, and it's about the breakdown of the authority structures and the structures of our world that aren't serving who we really are. And Mars in Pisces is saying maybe the breakdown in our structures and this rehash that's trying to happen in our world hasn't been able to really happen because we've lost our connection to source, to spirit. Coming back to that Mercury in Cancer, the mother, because the mother is what connects us back to the father, right? And so Mars sextile Pluto leading up to the second eclipse is a very important energy. And then right on the same day, the 19th of June, where that exact between Mars sextile Pluto saying, hey, we got to come back into connection to God to get anywhere, right? And it's like the authority structures. So what happened in the Piscean age, and the long and the short of it, is that the spiritual revelation moved us into the Pisces age and the whole Christ event and that whole story. And all the soul groups that were here, you guys at the shift of ages, all experienced like a very powerful period of time of spiritual revelation and this directed knowing of who you are in this greater mission over long periods of time to bring this impulse, spiritual impulse into the earth evolution. So a very like the light goes on, right? And so, but then the control energies used that energy of spiritual revelation and the spiritual oneness, created structural religions, constructs that used that spiritual connection to control humanity, right? Like you got to go through us to get to God now. And that's that Capricorn kind of coming up with the Pluto in Capricorn. So that's a pretty powerful energy. And Mars saying, you don't need, a lot of times when you got persecuted, that was a lot of times I've seen this again and again in these soul groups in past lives, is like because you were representing a direct connection to spirit and source. And they're like, not having it, because we need your taxes and we need your fear, right? Saw this one picture recently, a past life in the Middle Ages, and it was like a blanket of fear. It was just like this fear energy pervaded, that they created around magic, fear of medicine, fear of healing, fear of light. And you guys were all on the wrong side of the stick with that one. So that Mars sextile Pluto is saying, yeah, end of story, right? And that's maybe what these eclipses are about, because eclipses are about revealing and timelines and alignment with greater truth. Now, then Mercury turns retrograde on the same day of that Mars sextile Pluto in Cancer, right? So how do we reclaim back the spiritual revelation? How do we break these authority contracts of fear energy that keeps us playing small, keeps us turning down our light? Is that we come back into our connection with the mother, with the nurturing force of all, with our heart, and unconditional, compassionate love. So Mercury retrograde going like, we got to get this one. We can't move forward till we get that we complete the energy of the North Node in Cancer. So then on the 20th, Mars comes into its sextile with Jupiter. So Mars sextile Pluto, Mercury retrograde, and then Mars sextile Jupiter. And Jupiter and Pluto are coming closer back together, right? So Jupiter's at 24 still, and then Pluto's at 24, and now Jupiter has gone back to 25 at this point. So they're 1 degree apart. And then Mars is sextiling both of them, saying, hey, okay, sextiles are like jimmying the lock. little of this, a little of that, a little more spiritual revelation, a little more breaking down the authority contracts, a little more adjusting our physical reality to coming back into living a life. This is why you guys are here. Go back to that positive, beautiful energy, reclaiming and being the living example of spiritual revelation, and owning that your knowledge on a cellular level, that you are light being, and you're here for that, not for this play of events of accumulating items until you die. And so huge shift for these souls of like landing into that purpose, which can also be, this is part of the eclipses. It's like divine timelines trying to come in, but that can be rather traumatic because it's like, that's exactly fits this Venus retrograde where my life doesn't fit who I really am. Got to make some adjustments. So that's June 2020. Massive adjustments on all levels, personality, your physical life, the structures of your life, your connection to God, your connection to the mother nurturing, your connection to the authority contracts, permission to shine your light. It's all on the table. And then on that same day, the 20th, Mars sextile Jupiter, the sun conjuncts the south node in Sagittarius, the north node, as it comes to the end of Gemini and moves into Cancer. So that's interesting because Mercury conjunct the south node starts off this whole business, and then the sun north node, Mercury north node, sun north node in Gemini. And so it's kind of like, again, saying, what is this about? What is this? Now we're really into this Gemini north node chapter. We're really into this rearranging of our psyche and our understanding that is absolutely necessary. It's like, okay, yes, we got to break down and rebuild our structures. Yes, we have to come back into connection to the mother, but all of that is based on our conceptual reality, our ego constructs. And so the sun in South Node Gemini, North Node Gemini is like, again, who am I? And that's June 2020 as a theme. Who am I and what am I doing? And then, of course, the sun moves into Cancer on the 21st of June. Now, this is a powerful energy because on the 20th, we have the solstice. Actually, it moves in on the 20th. And that is the solstice. And then the solar eclipse is on the 21st. So the solstice and the solar eclipse happen very close together. And so that's going to be a huge energy of this kind of culmination of this nodal shift, and powerful because Venus turns direct on the 25th, right? So this is the very end. Venus is going way back into Gemini, way back into the confusion, way back into the not knowing who I am, not knowing what I want, not knowing what I'm doing. And then this eclipse happens. Right? And so the eclipse and the solstice, incredibly potent energy. Now, this eclipse happens at 0 degrees Cancer. And then we've got Mercury retrograde in Cancer. So it's a complete, maybe this whole rearranging of who, I don't know who I am. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm disconnected from my path and purpose. I don't feel like I deserve it. I failed in my mission. And it's all about, okay, come back home to mama. Come back home to mama. Just come into the fold. Connect with the mother. We're going through a journey together. You can't be a part of the journey if you can't come back into connection. And 0 degrees is like quintessential energy of Cancer. And it's speaking about, yes, how do we move out of, did we get the message of the North Node in Cancer and the South Node in Capricorn? But so this is the solar eclipses happen at new moon. So we'll have the sun and the moon together at 0 degrees Cancer. And so that's why it's close to the nodes there. And then Jupiter moves back to 24, just a couple of days after that eclipse. And so conjunct Pluto. Now, the Jupiter conjunct Pluto, the first one, was when we went into this crazy pandemic energy, right? So now we're going to have the second conjunction of Jupiter and Pluto on the heels of a total solar eclipse. I mean, not a total solar eclipse, but a solar eclipse at 0 degrees Cancer. And summer solstice or winter solstice in the southern hemisphere. So we got solstice, eclipse, Jupiter, Pluto coming back together. So the Jupiter, Pluto now, the second hit, seems to be about coming back into connection with the life force, which is interesting because this whole pandemic thing, there's so many aspects of it that are about disconnecting us from life force, life source. So there's evidence that the chemtrails that have been going on for like 20 years, that those have to do with lessening the available oxygen on the planet and blocking out the sun and creating a false atmosphere that control the weather and, you know, who knows what else, and feed us with a whole bunch of toxins and nanoparticles and whatever. Now, so we've got this aerosol spraying, which is interfering with our oxygen on the planet. Then we've got the coronavirus has been shown that this is a manipulated virus on an RNA level that targets the iron molecule of the hemoglobin, right? So our lungs can't grab a hold of that oxygen. Then we've got 5G technology that acts together with this Frankenvirus created in a lab thing, right? And the 5G technology has the effect on our body of interfering with our ability to uptake oxygen. Now, if that's not enough, go ahead and put a mask on and then try to breathe, right? So isn't it interesting, this Cancer energy, Mercury retrograde in Cancer, eclipse in Cancer, and at 0 degrees, and, you know, like, kind of like, ooh, humanity, are you going to claim back your life force? And that's what's frustrating for me as studying healing and health my whole life as a classical homeopath, and the power of the vital force, right? The power of our body in the life force in our body when it's given the right message to heal itself. And we're just completely, humanity just said, oh, it's okay, I'm just scared. Like, give me the vaccine, anything, just to get me out of this fear, right? And talk about feeling like you failed in your mission in past lives around healthcare and being about humanity and their disconnection from the life force. But this is what rules all. This is the source of the universe. It's free energy. It's what holds all the planets in place. It's like it's a form of electricity that's everywhere around us. It's what makes our body go. And so this vital force, I've been shown, this vital force that is the source of all, that is the adjusting factor, brings all back into balance eventually. And so it's like these souls may be being asked as your greater, wider purpose right now to put your attention on that equilibrium source. And I've been shown this as like this picture of a beaker, kind of a glass container and a glass stirrer, and they're actually made of crystal, right? And there's this stirring going on, right? This attenuation is what's called in homeopathy when you shake up and potentize the substance in the water by shaking it up. But this is what's happening right now. The Great Mother, vital force, as a representation of the vital force of the universe, you know, that. So what happens in the body is that our symptoms that we have are tell us that we're out of balance, right? And then our vital force comes in. That's our vital force. The symptoms are a symptom of our vital force saying things are out of whack, right? And that's why homeopathy is so powerful, because it's a message to the body saying, oh, these symptoms fit this picture of something in nature, and this is a message to the body of how to get the vital force to act, the roadmap home for the healing. And so this is where we're at right now. We're in this homeopathic remedy place, this place in between the disease and the cure are the same. It's like uncomfortable because it's the healing crisis, but the vital force, the great force of the universe is stirring the pot. This is like a polar shift, and it's like, it's going to bring it back to balance. There's no other way to go. It's going to be back to the whole. It's going to be back to the oneness principle. And if we, as these advanced souls, can go there and hold our attention there and be present with this greater vital force and claim back that, maybe as an exercise, awareness of our vital force in our physical body, and this greater, wider balancing, great harmonizer, And then just keeping in mind that picture that the symptoms are how your body is trying to get back into balance, right? And so the symptoms we're seeing in the world right now are because of the stirring, it's because of the remedy. And it's actually way more harmonious than it could be, but it's also very painful to just wait and be in the soup of that in between. And this is kind of how we're going to feel throughout June 2020. And yet it's all about connecting us back to that. Now, that Jupiter-Pluto had this energy because Pluto is like our power. And then Jupiter is expanding, but it's also fear of our power. So the way we got into all these authority contracts and all these structures that don't work for us is our fear of our own potency. And being like, oh, you guys better keep it for me, right? And it's time to come back into our power and come back into our potency and know that. So throughout time, especially these dark ages, healing vibration has been called disease, right? And the medicine has been called poison, and the healers have been called heretics and the devil. And this is this great rearranging that's happening, right? And a deep release of shame and failure from these soul groups in order to get back into that connection with the healer you are. Receive the healing from the mother, the connection from the mother that you need to get back on the horse and get back on the centaur, and ride home into your heart. So powerful, because on the 25th, after this, we got that Jupiter-Pluto thing going on, and then Venus turns direct. And then it won't come out of shadow until a whole nother month, the 26th. That's when it does its third and final square with Neptune. So the Venus retrograde energy and square with Neptune is going to go through the end of July. That's the chapter that we're in. But it'll be quite a potent shift after the eclipses, and then Venus turns direct on the 25th, and Mercury turns direct July 12th. And so it's going to be kind of like bam, bam, bam. We got Jupiter, Pluto, Venus direct, Mercury direct, and then on the 27th of June, powerful shift of energy, Mars moves into its home sign of Aries. So I think that's when we're really going to feel the shift out of this chapter, except for Mars is taking a retrograde in Aries, its home sign, in later in the year. So that's kind of going on there. So then through July, we're going to still feel this energy of the eclipses working itself out. On the July 1st, Saturn moves back into Capricorn, meaning it's coming back into the mix of connecting with Jupiter and Pluto, back into Capricorn, out of Aquarius. It's like, okay, I did what I could do about building this new, trying to build in plasma, and then get back into Capricorn. And Saturn is at home in Capricorn, so it's a little bit of a relief for Saturn. And yet it's like, whoa, like, how do we make sense of the particle versus the wave theory and the way we've seen life as totally only physical, and it's actually only energy, right? And this is like, whoa. So this whole rearranging is really about that. And maybe that's how we get back into the mother. It's like, oh, energy, right? Because the disconnection from the mother has everything to do with a materialistic, ego-based, narcissistic culture, right? So then also on the 1st, the sun comes into a conjunction with Mercury in Cancer, and then they both square Chiron. So, wow. And then at the middle of July, Mars comes into a conjunction with Chiron. So we're talking about where we haven't been able to be who we really are. We've been turning down our light. And then the connection of that with our disconnection to the mother principle and our disconnection from source. And it's kind of like, well, which came first? Did we turn our light down, then we got disconnected? Or was it because we got disconnected and then we turned our light down? But anyway, it's about that square energy is like, you cannot do. So this is an interesting thing in these soul groups where it's like so often they're like, well, how do I just want to do what I'm here to do, and I just want my soulmate and I just want my soul group. And yet they're scared shitless of who they are. And it's like, well, then how is your soulmate going to find you if you won't go anywhere near who you are in your greater power, right? And it's like, I just want to do what I'm here to do, but they won't go anywhere near their gifts and skills because they don't feel like they deserve them and they're scared of their potency, and it's like you don't get to have it both ways. And that's this Sun, Mercury, and Cancer square Chiron. You cannot be hiding from who you are and your greater purpose and power and feel in connection to the Great Mother and nurtured by this world. And so that seems to be when we're really going to start to understand what that eclipse season has been about. So the first couple weeks of July are going to be kind of, reorienting. And so then we'll be looking at a full moon in Capricorn. And so right around that time, we've got Mars conjunct Chiron. So all of this is on the table. And then July 12th, Mercury turns direct and then comes out of shadow. Both Mercury and Venus come out of their retrograde shadow. So we're in it. We're just in it. We're in it to win it. So hang in there and know that this is a turning point. It's just a very elongated, strange turning point. And the eclipses always bring this out of time feeling, timeline alignment. Things are being revealed, sorted through in the backdrop of life, and we've already been feeling this. And then Venus retrograde has been really pushing us to this place. So June 2020, huge culmination of a lot of core issues for these soul groups, but it's about getting back on the horse and getting back on the quest and connecting back together and coming back into true expression, full expression of our light and power. So super exciting times ahead once we get through this very confusing chapter. And so I look forward to keeping up to date with you with updates through this very potent and powerful June 2020. So I look forward to seeing you soon on the next update. Until then, I'm Adrienne Elise. Namaste.